industry. I know you'd rather be drinking green Guinness down the pub. Maybe not. Okay. So as you know, this is I've got a little technical problem here. So all my photos are now not in the order that they should be. So I'm just going to wing it. Hopefully I can point some out. I'm currently co-editing a book about John Lilly at the moment. It's going to be a John Lilly reader, so it's going to be kind of like a best-of. So myself and Jesse Houghton's going to come out in Synergy Press, hopefully by November. So I'm realising as I'm reading through all his books again, what a huge body of work that he has. What interests me is the arc of somebody's life, and he's gone very far out, hasn't he? He's gone very far out. So he was born in St. Paul, Minnesota. That's him as a little baby, and his father was a banker, and then he actually started, I think it was one of the first airways in the States. John remembers as a kid the airplanes when they first started, and they were trying to do airmail, and there was a lot of pressure on for everybody to do airmail and get it there in time, and a lot of people died. In fact, if you were an air hostess back then, you had to be a nurse to do that job, unless you were a nurse at the same time. I should actually say at the beginning, I know this is a psychedelic society, and this is not all going to be about psychedelics, but since it means mind manifesting, then I think John kind of falls into that category, because he certainly manifested his mind. So at an early age, John was always having little, shall we call it, alternate realities experienced as a kid. One time he had visions of angels and God in his throne and all that kind of stuff from having TB. And it was the first kind of experience where he came into contact with his guardians, he called the ECHO, Earth Angels Control Office, because at that age he didn't know what was going on. But he had many different ones like that, many little kind of mystical experiences. One time his dog saved him from going over a cliff, and kind of bit him. He was very angry, but this kind of guardian appeared and said he was just protecting you, you know. So, so he was known as young Einstein that time, because he was always playing with chemistry sets and exploding things in the house. And he wrote a paper when he was 16 called What is Reality? And he was already kind of putting his monad down for questioning how the mind and how the brain works at 16. His mother got him to read philosophy and Kant and everything else under the sun he could get his hands on. So he was obviously quite brainy, and his father was rich enough to put him to university, but actually John got into Caltech for free. So that was him moving out of the house and going to Caltech. So this is an early lab of John's. When he was at Caltech, everything was new, exciting. He had lots of instruments to play with. He invented this thing called the Bavatron. It was the first electrical display of the brain. Difficult times, these times in the 50s, well actually the 40s. Of course, they were experimenting with animals, and John was doing that. He was working on cats and he was working on monkeys. And before John, he used to have to cut off the top of the head of the monkey and insert probes. And John invented this kind of sheath that could go in and pulled it out. Kind of maybe not looked upon these days as a good thing to do, but you know, this is how it went these days. So when he was at Caltech, he also invented a thing called the Lilly wave, which was able to look at the brain, but make it dance around so that there was no harm, apart from what prevented that. There was no harm going on the brain of the subject type thing. I think it was there he started to really look into the workings of the brain. You know, he was always kind of trying to figure out what was going on with the brain. Where was the mind? Was it contained in the brain or not? So he went from, I think at Caltech, he went to Dartmouth College, and he was working for it was the time of the war, so it was the Second World War. So his teacher made a big impression on him by saying that anything you're going to do, you need to experiment on yourself first. So that's what he did. So for every experiment he did, for whether it's for the Air Force, he would put himself into decompression chambers, he would put gases in, take gases out, put himself through everything that a pilot would have to endure: explosive decompression, oxygen deprivation, but always on himself. Always. And this is what has kind of ruled through his life. He always felt that if you're going to experiment, you have to experiment on yourself first and not on other people. So he went from there to, from Dartmouth, he went to NIMH, the National Institute of Mental Health, and he carried on his work with looking into the functions of the brain. And of course at that time they didn't know if the mind was contained in the brain or not, so there were different schools of thought. So John thought, well, how do I negate that? There was experiments going on at McGill University up in Canada, where they had people with kind of in solitary confinement and had cuffs on there, and so they would be able to touch themselves and kind of make them as comfortable as possible. But that wasn't good enough for John. He wanted to go deeper. So he thought, how do I cut out the senses? How do I get deeper into the mind? So he invented the isolation tank, except it wasn't a flotation tank back then. Back then, they had an old diver's tank, and the Pope drinking cava, and the Queen drinking cava. Okay, so it was basically an old diver's tank, and they had to make individual latex masks with breathing tubes, and they were suspended by kind of pulleys in water. And John would go in for days at a time because he could just piss whatever he wanted, so water was circulated slowly. Wasn't perfect isolation because obviously the stuff touching the face and everything, but he was at least going into altered states. Now at the time it was the Korean War at the time, so John felt that he couldn't actually tell his fellow colleagues what was going on, what was going on in his mind, because he was actually, he's having telepathic experiences, out-of-body experiences, and I think the army and everybody was interested in sensory deprivation, but only for trying to get information out of people. But John realized there's a difference between deprivation and isolation. So he decided to kind of keep most of his thoughts to himself about that. So at that time, because it was the Korean War, there was a lot of pressure on John to kind of come up with various things. So he was asked by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that was the Army, the CIA, and everybody, to give a presentation on his work with finding the pain and pleasures of the centres in the brain. I think you've probably all seen old films and stuff like that of you know, a cat or a monkey pressing the button and having an orgasm and just keep pressing the button. So John was asked to give this presentation, but he was very aware of the consequences that might entail. So he said, okay, I have conditions to do that only it's not a secret thing, that it gets made public, that it's recorded, all that kind of stuff. And he was assured that this would be the case, and unfortunately it turned out not to be. So he found out one time that his security clearance kind of got messed up, and he was asked to leave a presentation by a government contractor. This is 6 months later. And here was this film of a donkey with an atomic weapon strapped to its back, heading through a mountain pass. And it had a kind of sundial on its head, and it was operated by remote control. So it's like 1957. And Sandinia, I think the corporation, they were known for working on small nuclear bombs, and this is what they were doing. So if it stayed off course, it got pleasure, and if it veered off course, it got pain. So John saw very quickly what could happen if you ran up against the wall. So he decided not to go down that route and stopped working on putting electrodes into brains and that kind of stuff. He wasn't doing it on any humans. There was a guy in Paris, seemingly some people there that were working on that kind of thing that could covertly do it. You can even see it from the outside. So who knows what the guys were up to back then or now. So while he was in MIH and he was working in a tank, he was realizing, because he was into brains, he was into big brains, he was realizing that the dolphins were interested, the cetaceans. He'd actually been on a I think it was the government decided to put some money, or perhaps some money, we were thinking about it, into looking to, should they put any money into looking for extraterrestrials. So they had a kind of, I think Carl Sagan might have been on it, very early young man. They had a meeting with various big brains about should we put any money into it, because this is pre-SETI, you know. And John was the only one who kind of said, well, instead of kind of putting money off planet, why do we have a look at the large brains of all the species that are on this planet? Because here we have dolphins who have larger brains than ours, and we have something like the sperm whale, which is 10,000 grams, and we have all the other cetaceans. So they've got larger brain areas than us, and they have these what they call the silent areas. So John, you can understand all these photos are all chaotic, it's nothing to do with, they're all mixed up, so the way it says to me, I'm doing the best I can with it. John realised that this could be an area for exploration, but he didn't want to do it with probing brains and things. So he stopped his work at NIMH and he went to the Virgin Islands and set up a place there. And they made an area that the dolphins could come into, and started a series of experiments with trying to communicate with dolphins. And John realised at that point that computers were starting to come in. They always come through the military first, but they weren't. He reckoned probably maybe another 30 years they might be of use to communicate with dolphins. So he just interacted with the dolphins until we had people like Gregory Bates involved. And did any of you see that film on Channel 4, the women who live with dolphins? Anybody? No? Came out last year? You did.
I think it was a series, wasn't it?
No, just one. It was a one-off. It was a Scottish series based on me. So this woman, Margaret Howe, she decided, it was her idea, she decided to live with a dolphin called Peter for a few months, just the two of them. And so they flooded basically a house, which was down by the ocean, and the two of them lived together. And to try and get some kind of communication going on. Now they're very social creatures, dolphins, and Margaret realized very quickly that he needed certain things to be taken care of. He was highly sexual, so they have 10-inch penises, prehensile, and come to a flat point at the top. And when they go mating, when they all get together, it's like a big orgy, and it just goes on for many, many, many hours. They're very sexual creatures. So Margaret was a little bit afraid, first of all, with the way the dolphin was approaching her, because these jaws can actually snap your leg too very easily. And she was quite impressed because Peter noticed her kind of fear and put a ball in the back of its mouth when he went to kind of put his beak over her legs. She was impressed by that. But it ended up, it was kind of, it's difficult to tell, who's working with the Who and who's programming the Who. But she had to masturbate him a few times daily before he would let her interact and try and learn English sounds, phonetics and vowels and things. Yeah. So so John he did this work for a while. He got quite a lot of money from that for people investing in, not investing in, but given it was quite a lot of money to handle all the dolphins and feeding and the whole place. But eventually that kind of petered out. You see, you got to understand is that people have not looked at dolphins since Aristotle's time. Aristotle in Greek times was talking about dolphins could speak, and there's a famous, I have it here, I had the dolphin coin with the dolphins in the back, the boy in the back of the dolphin, and so John actually tested that. He actually managed to get some kids in, and they would go onto the back of the dolphin and swim about. But again, so nobody had actually seen that was actually true since Aristotle's times. And they were actually looked upon as like vermin of the sea, which is really sad if you think about it, where we are nowadays. They just weren't looked upon as the way we look upon them now. And a lot has to do with that is because of John, because he brought a book out called Man and Dolphin, and basically he was saying that these are very sentient beings. They communicate. They're very social. Their breathing is voluntary. So if they get knocked out, you'll find the other ones will come around and hold it up to the surface so that it will breathe air. Otherwise, it would drown. And of course, the way they communicate is through many different frequencies. I mean, they actually go all the way up to the AM hertz. That's why John knew the computers weren't strong enough to do it at that time. Anyway, so he closed that down at a certain point. There's a, what do you call it? You see a touch screen, iPad. I mean, it used to be too easy trying to touch a screen there. That's a beluga whale, actually, and that's Tony, John's wife. So he did that for about 4 or 5 years. They had that place, and he had a lot of interesting people who came around and checked it out. Aldous Huxley was one of them. Aldous liked his work with the isolation tank. Thought it was kind of a yogi cave for the West, and actually got into the pool. He was near blind at that time. He went into the pool and swam with the dolphins. This big lanky Englishman. So he went from the dolphins. From there, he ended up in California, and this is where he goes from. He was kind of, he was a hardcore scientist. You can understand, it's like people can say like his least accomplishment was becoming a medical doctor. He was, he was a true scientist in the word. He covered many different disciplines. It was the mind of the dolphin. So this had a huge impact. Actually, when it was published in about a dozen different languages, and actually within 6 months of it being published in Russia, and the Russians made a decree not to allow fishing of dolphins, not to kill dolphins. So I had an effect right away with that. And then, did anyone ever see the film The Day of the Dolphin? Any hands? Nobody? Oh dear, oh dear. It was George C. Scott who played John in it. And it's kind of semi-based in John, but there was some spies came into John's place in the Virgin Islands because obviously because they didn't want to work for the government anymore. They were kind of sneaking up on him. So they sent some kind of people in to learn what he was doing with the dolphins. And in this film, George C. Scott one, they trained some dolphins to plant a mine under the president's yacht type thing. And unfortunately, years later, of course, the Navy ended up using them in Vietnam for doing various things, which is not very nice. But I was very happy to see the last Gulf War. I don't know if you remember, there was like front page stuff like Independent Newsies. American guy, very proud, he's been training his dolphins to take over to the Gulf, and their names. And as soon as they get into the water in the Gulf, one of them just fucked off to look for some pussy, excuse the language, but just what the hell with the war and Rome. So he ends up in California, and this is where he kind of starts to change, only in the sense of he's still the scientist, but he starts to go to places like Big Sur, in Northern California, where the human potential movement was forming. So there's a lot of people. This is Burgess Meredith, used to be the Batman, no, used to be the Joker, right? The original series. He finds some funding to work with more dolphin work, but now they've got computers. They didn't have them back in the earlier days. He's also started writing now, like, because he doesn't have to work for the government, he can actually produce his own books. So at that time he was I guess probably in MH with the tank work, he was probably already thinking about what eventually became a book called Programming and Metaprogramming in the Human Biocomputer. And this was John's work with LSD in the flotation tank. So originally back in the 50s he wouldn't take any acid in the tank because he didn't want, in his mind, the work that he was doing in there to be kind of tainted. And also because everybody was paranoid and it was all Korean War and they were dosing soldiers with acid and stuff. John just like, now he hadn't had it. He didn't have acid till like 62, 63. So, but already in his head he was kind of formulating this idea that we are programmable entities, that we're born with certain programs, fight, flight, fuck, eat shit, that kind of stuff. It's all ingrained in us. And then you have your parents' programming and society's programming, although it might not be the best programming for us. But he realized from an early age, I would say even at 3 years old, when he was when his younger brother took over from his mum's breast, he got very angry and decided to shut all that kind of emotion out, shut that down, the fear, the anger and everything, you know. He realized that was kind of like that was first being able to program himself. And he did like 3 years of 5 days a week psychoanalysis under student of Freud, so he kind of got really deep. He went right back to the womb and all the way up again type thing, you know. I don't know if you remember all, but it all came out. And also, he also had, I think that programming stuff was also came earlier on with when he had his first orgasm. He was on his father's, he used to have these big vibrating machines you could get on, a big belt, thinking it would shake off the fat, and he had an orgasm, ejaculated, and saw God again, angels and everything. He went and told his Catholic priest, and this priest kind of slapped him and said, only angels have visions, sorry, only saints have visions. Kind of shut him down until he was in the tank again many years later, and started to have him again. But all through his life, he's piecing pieces together this about how we're programmable entities. So when he gets to, when he gets to California, he's meeting up with all these people in the human potential movement. So you've got people at Big Sur. You've got Dick Price. You've got Ida Rolfe. And you've got Timothy Leary, all this gang. There's John and Timmy in the living room in the early later years. They became very good friends. They also became very good friends with Laura Huxley and all these guys. So this book, Program and Meta-Program in Human Biocomputer, and so he starts to map states of consciousness in a tank on acid and with other people as well. And it was under government auspices. It was the last thing he did for the government. He realized that he was turned on by Ramdas to Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And his favorite Yoga Sutra one was the Science of Yoga by Timini. And he realized that the spaces that the yogis were relating to in the Yoga Sutras was the same ones that he was going to in the tank on acid. So he wrote all that stuff down, but in the middle of it, 67, acid was becoming out of control as far as the American government is concerned, and Timothy was public enemy #1, and so they withdrew it. So everybody that had access to Sandoz acid had to give it back. And John took his before that John had taken his last trip out on a little boat and got eyeballed by a whale and was taken into the whale group mind consciousness type thing. So that book, it wasn't a book then, he wrote it up and it was circulated in underground in San Francisco. And people couldn't realize, because at that time people were dropping acid, and of course in these days, they're doing 300 to 500 mics and things, and not like 100 mics at a time. But they didn't have a map, they didn't know what the fuck was going on. So everybody's heading to India, because that was the only kind of realized people were mapping states of consciousness there, But John's work came in, and it was kind of a bit easier for people to understand, because he was, from a scientific point of view, he's mapping it out, and so it had a huge impact. It didn't become a book 2 years later, and it just got re-released last year. And comes in as control books. But it's a very, very good book. I think it's a seminal work. I have to read it. So, I'm doing it again. So he came up with, can you read that? No, I'll read it out to you. So, in the province of the mind, what one believes to be true or becomes true within certain limits to be found experientially, these limits are further beliefs to be transcended. So John's saying that it's open-ended. There's don't get caught in the one belief system. Now, he talks about a thing called alternity. Anyone hear of alternity here? Alternity. It's a nice thing, because it's a domain, a space, a place where all possibilities stand open to oneself. So actually, you physically feel it. I've had it a couple of times when I've been high in acid. It's kind of like, it's like you're in the center of a flower and you get petals of possibilities that stretched out to infinity all around you. And we choose which one we want to go back into. I kind of think of these kind of paintings of the old saints with the kind of, the stuff sticking out their heads. Who knows? But so he was working on this, on getting this together over the years. Sometimes we say the problems in the networks of the mind. A lot of books. Simulations of God is a very good book he put out. It's now out of print, which is really sad, but we're going to try and get it back in next year. What he did was, again, this is back down to the belief systems. You have each chapter is like, God is sport, God is drugs, God is religion, God is science. What is your fucking God? So he just strips it right down to what is your belief system, It's kind of sad that this is out of print. I see that. Yeah, that's right. They did. They made it into India last year. They made non-human persons. Bands holds them in captivity for commercial entertainment. Good. It happens. John actually wanted them to be represented at the United Nations. They're called Cetacean Nation. Cosmic love. So he's talking about echo here. Cosmic love is absolutely ruthless and highly indifferent. He teaches his lessons, can't spell there, whether you like or dislike them or not. So he came up with echo. This is his way of talking about God, I suppose. Whatever that God thing is. He makes it, he calls it Earth Coincidence Control Office, and it's a galactic coincidence control office, GCCCC. So if you take care of your short-term coincidences, then echo takes care of your long-term coincidences. Pictures of Dave in there. Okay, so he met his wife Toni in California. She was an ex-lover of Alan Watts. They became very good friends. And John wrote many books back then. He wrote Center of the Cyclone, Autobiography of Inner Space. He did one with Toni, his wife, called The Dyadic Cyclone. Yeah, there's echo there. Just to show you, there's some brain size. There's a human brain, there's a dolphin brain, the difference the sizes in. So a sperm whale would be maybe twice the size of the dolphin brain. And these guys can communicate within 10,000 miles underwater. And we think we're good with our communications. But they're doing it without any wires and stuff. 10,000 miles. And of course, a lot of what the military, the Navy does, and ocean-going liners and all the stuff we do in the sea couldn't disrupt that. But do you remember that Star Trek film with they had to rescue a whale from, was it the future? Past.
Yeah, it's the past. They came to the present, our present.
Came to the present, that was great. John always loved Star Trek, and I used to, when I lived outside his house, I lived in this caravan outside his house, and he would always call me twice a day and say, "Heads on." Going to watch Star Trek again. And excited to see Leonard Nimoy die this week. Can you tell you an anecdote about Leonard Nimoy? I suppose I'm allowed. Okay. I was good friends with his secretary when I lived in Los Angeles, and I went to visit her one time. A mutual friend called me when I was in the office, and he said, "Have you seen Big Ears yet?" And I said, No, I haven't seen Big Ears yet. And turned around, and he was in the doorway. So, California, that's where I met John. I met John in the late 80s. And kind of, there. That's Timothy, Larry, and John. So John introduced me to everybody I wanted to meet over there. We're good friends with Oscar Janiger. Oscar Janiger was ran the Albert Hoffman Foundation in Los Angeles, and he was a wonderful, wonderful man. And he gave an acid to Anis Nin, Andre Previn, and Jack Nicholson, and Cary Grant, the most famous. He gave it to many, many times to Cary Grant. Cary Grant loved it so much he wanted to make a movie about it. So this is back in the 50s when it was all legal and people could see the potential of it. And Oscar was very good at that. He's incredible. So yeah, he did a lot of work with John. They were very good friends. That's me a little bit. It's getting a bit long now. You guys enjoying the snuff there? That's me in a tank at Timothy's house. So Timothy was dying pancreatic cancer, and decided to put a tank up in his bedroom for him to use to help out. A little bit thinner these days. And he was a wonderful friend to John. They used to do lots of talks together, lots of lectures together. And he was a great man. So I spent every day with him for the last 3 months of his life, right up to his deathbed, holding his pulse as he was going. Can you see I dropped some meds? Because he couldn't do it. Now he'd given Laura Huxley some acid to give to Aldous on his deathbed. He asked for, he did 2 shots of 100 micrograms. Went out very beautifully, which read the directly dead to him. And she was very, very good friends with Timothy. So his ashes went into space with Gene Roddenberry, bringing back Star Trek when he died. Some of them actually came over to Glastonbury Tor, I don't know if you know that. They were scattered at Glastonbury Tor. But the rest went up in space and released with the space shuttle. I travelled a lot with John, especially to Japan. I went there quite a few times, and John was really good with Japanese. He, he'd do these like interviews with NTT, which is like the second largest telecommunications company in the world, and they would ask him because they thought they introduced him as the grandfather of communication. And he started talking to them about psychedelics, dolphins and erections and things. And I remember one time this guy asked, he said, "John, we don't have these things in Japan." So it gets translated. And John said, "Well, get yourself a cow. When the cow shits, you got mighty mushrooms. You've got a cow, you need a vet, and the vet can get you ketamine." He's going to lay it out for them, you know. And also, they had this girl who'd been swimming with the dolphins, Olympic swimmer, and John asked her, did you masturbate any dolphins? And he's like, and John was asked afterwards, why are you kind of bringing up sex, talking about dolphins there and everything, and he's like, well, I've been telling for years not to kill dolphins, so if I talk about sex, then people listen and prick their ears up. So that was a time. The deep self was his major work with the tank. He set up a place in Malibu where he put basically built 5 tanks. And so at that time, he hadn't done any tanks for years. The only one in between the first tanks with the masks and stuff, he had a tank set up with the dolphins where he would take acid while the dolphins in the pool in St. Thomas, and that was just seawater in the tank. But it wasn't until Glenn Perry started the first commercial company called Samadhi Tank Company, where he suggested using Epsom salts. And John clicked on right away and said, right, we'll just bring that up to saturation, which they did, which means they just kept putting and see how much they could keep dissolving in water. So now a modern tank is about 10 inches of water with up to 1,000 pounds of Epsom salts in it, which is MgSO4, magnesium sulfate. So the magnesium relaxes your muscles, and you relax muscles that you didn't even know you had. Many people have floated in here. Keep your hands up. Now what happened to this place? There's supposed to be one here in Canterbury.
Yeah, they have a website, but I've never found them. They've never responded to any communications.
Yeah, they're quite hidden somewhere.
Well, no, I don't think they're really there. I think they got as far as making a website.
I googled up a couple of times and it just went straight to some random
Oh
lady.
yeah,
Well, let me tell you
There's
just
a wall
now.
that you can walk through.
yeah.
A wall that you can walk through. You gotta
Well,
find the right wall.
just now they're just taking off big time in the States. I mean, I tried 20 odd years ago. I had one set up. Well, I had one. I started setting them back up at John's house when I moved to John's. And then I was setting them up in psychiatrists' offices and people's businesses. I did one in Japan and got them here and there. But they just weren't taking off, and I didn't know whether it was because of AIDS and this kind of thing at that time. People were maybe afraid. But if anyone's seen social media, they've just taken off in the past 2 years in the States, thanks to people like Joe Rogan. Look him up, he's a big psychedelic head, likes to do DMT in the tank and things. And now they're just sprouting up like flowers all over the bloody States. So it's my intent to try and spread them around the UK as soon as possible. I have 2 used tanks I'm going to set up, hopefully within 6 months. Please. I'd like to see them in the National Health Service. Seriously, because it's such an amazing tool to use. You can get like 6 hours of sleep, 8 hours sleep in 2 hours or an hour and a half. It's the most profound relaxation you'll feel on the planet. It's like being caught between the moon and the earth. There's no pool. Now you get little glimpses of it, feel like you're in the Dead Sea or you're relaxed in your bathtub and stuff, but it's not quite the same. It's not the same at all. And it's got many, many benefits, for people with pain, for letting go, and I think for getting into your deep self, as John calls it. Because you can peel away the layers of the onion much easier, and especially for people like me, I've got like metal hips and back problems and things, and so if I'm going to do some yoga, do some meditation, it takes me a while to get to, yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, but you had a sense withdrawal. So I'm trying to negate, the fucking nerves going, "Hey, you bastard, do it to me," and that kind of stuff. So it takes a while to get into the spaces you want to go to. You're in the tank, you're right there. So if you do it, try and do 3 as close together as possible, and then you really get it. You really get it. And as I said, in hospitals, for anything, tools. I mean, I had musicians use them. They would be working on recording, and you've got speakers under the water, and water is a better transducer of sound than air is. Yeah, hence the whales. So they wait for an hour, and then after an hour, your brain's looking for some kind of input. We want this, fucking it's Twitter, it's everything. We want something coming in. And so if you press the air button and the music that you've been working on comes in, you will really pay attention to it. So you can use it for super learning as well, that kind of thing. You're learning a language, just press the button and you're really paying attention to it. So there's all sorts, and it's a great place to experiment with psychoactives. It's the best place, and that's where John did most of his ketamine work, was in the tank. Again, at the Psychedelic Society, I have to talk about these kind of things. I'll talk about acid, but let me talk about K. I mean, you guys know how John got into K in the first place? No. He had a friend called Craig Inglis, and John suffered for 35 years from migraine headaches. Really bad, crippling, like once every 8 weeks, he would just be devastated on the floor for 35 years. And Craig Inglis, John was in a tank at Estlin, and Craig Inglis said, "Well, I have something you might want to try." And he gave him 1 shot, about 30 milligrams, and he said, kind of went out a couple of feet. Gave him another shot, and went out another few feet, and then he gave him like 100, and disappeared over the horizon forever, and never came back.
Was that during migraine?
This was during the migraine. Yeah, he had the migraine and went into the tank, because if you get a migraine, you want to shut down as much stimuli and stuff coming as possible, so you can handle it. So this was in the tank, yeah, during the migraine, and he never got it back. So that's a good one for anyone in the medical field to go and have a look at, to see why this happens. Has any of you ever read The Scientist? Anybody? Hands up? No? Okay, this is John's autobiography. There's a lot in it. There's a lot in it. Yeah, he decided. You think he thought that perhaps the ketamine was almost like a chemical isolation tank. Yeah. And in his mind, as a scientist, it was predictable, in the sense of, you could take 50, you could take 100 milligrams, you could do this, you could do that, and you could go to something. So he took it quite far. He ended up experimenting, taking it every hour, 24 hours a day for 3 weeks at one point.
He's back.
Yeah. And that culminated in him trying to get a hold of the President of the United States, flying to Washington and trying to warn the President of the solid state conspiracy, because he got into this mindset where he was in connection with beings that were kind of the opposite of Echo. So it was what we're going into with our AI stuff, you know. So he flew to Washington trying to warn the president, and he ended up being locked up for a little bit. And luckily, the guy that got locked up, who ran the place, got locked up, knew John from the early days and kind of let him out. But he got into his whole Echo thing and everything with Kay, you know. So I don't know. These days, I think John might have thought twice about K. He mentioned it in The Scientist as vitamin K, didn't call it ketamine, but then later when it got reproduced, he told it what it was, you know. And he did it probably on and off, yeah, until his death, basically. But didn't do it all the time. I think that period was definitely a kind of intense period of his life. And I'm not sure if he would, like what has happened with the kind of negative effects of it that's happened these days with physical stuff with bladders and stuff with people, you know. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. So, where are we? Oh yeah, everyone here see the film Altered States? The movie Altered States. We've got 2. All right, guys, go and rent it, for goodness sake. This was a great film. So, a guy called Paddy Chayefsky wrote the book, and it's based on Craig Inglis, the same guy who gave Kay to John. They were doing experiments up at the Malibu where John lived, and one time John came across Craig, and he looked like he was almost having an epileptic fit or something, but he was standing up while doing it. Now, he didn't tell John till afterwards that he pre-programmed himself to go as far back as he could in humanoid, to go far back. And he ended up, in his mind, as a pre-hominid ape, he was climbing a tree and everything, hence the climbing up and down thing was the job that was epileptic fit or something. And Paddy Chayefsky got a hold of this story and turned it into a movie called Altered States. And it's really good. I knew the producer of the movie, he was a good friend of mine. Although I always gave him kind of a hard time because I was trying to get tanks moving at that time, trying to get people into them. And in the movie, it's actually mushrooms that they take in Mexico, and the main actor, he wants to go back to his primordial self, So he takes magic mushrooms in the tank, and brings the juice back to Los Angeles to take. Initially enough, Dan Mellon, the producer, told me that he was asked by the shaman, and it was a real shaman in the movie that did the mushrooms. If he wanted everybody else to do the mushrooms, and only Dan did it. Everybody else was Dan, and it was his kind of special. It was the experiences that he gave to the special effects department that gave it. So it's a really good movie. Go see it. I mean, you might think these days it's a bit too. I don't know. It was far out. It was far out for its time. Definitely worth seeing. Definitely worth seeing. But that was using. So anyway, so using the tank for psychedelics is most recommended. Obviously, there's a problem with public centres, but hopefully to get around that, there's 2 kids in the States who have made a tent for a spare room in your house for very cheap. Because some of these tanks go up to 23,000 quid to buy. Yeah. So what they've done is they've made a kind of zipper tent, like a pyramid, and for about 3,000 quid. So highly recommended. You get a bunch of you together, you say, okay, I'll put in 50 quid. Somebody's got a spare room. It's not going to be soundproof, but you can do your best by putting stuff on the wall and things. But that's a great way to kind of share and keep the costs down and, you know, and have experience with it. Yeah. Here's a top of the range flotation tank now. This is a Rolls Royce of tanks. It's called the isopod. They're very smart. What they've done is they've taken the heating pad out of the tank and put it by the pump, and also they made it like a vacuum flask in the walls, so that keeps the temperature really, really good. Because you're very, very sensitive in there. We should actually feel this, the temperature of the water is essentially body temperature. You should actually just feel a little cooling if you move your hand. Pretty cool, huh? Spacey. There's a place in London, well actually they've just moved their own in Vauxhall called Floatworks in London. If anyone's in London and want to go float, these guys are really good. I've got I think 6 tanks there with these ones. Now you pay per hour, you buy it for the hour, but they're doing stuff like night floats and things as well, so you can go in for longer periods of time. And, you know, and they do deals when you buy